Dear Shivam, thank you so much for joining us for our second episode on our podcast, Drip by Drip Unveiling Fashion's Thirsty Truth. We are really happy to have you here because you are an expert in all matters chemicals, dyeing, water stewardship, water usage in the textile supply chain. And I'm very excited to hear more about that from your perspective today. So thanks for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amira. I'm super glad to be. I'm honored to be invited as well, and I would do my best to give out as much clarity on the water topic in the fashion industry, and hopefully people
Perfect.
can move towards it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So, Shivan, to quickly and very briefly introduce you to our audience, you are from India and you have a background in chemical and also in water engineering. And this is what you studied. And you're right now working at Fashion for Good in the Netherlands, working on innovation, textile technology, all that. Can you briefly explain what you're doing specifically, like professionally? What are the topics that you're focusing on right now?
Yeah, perfect, absolutely. So on the professional side, I mostly work on finding innovations for the textile industry, specifically on the processing or the wet processing end of textiles. So anything to do with pre-treatment, coloration, finishing, anywhere where the interaction of the fabric is with any sort of chemistry and water. So that is where we're trying to look for innovations to improve the overall footprint of textiles and enable much more safer chemistry to be adopted into the industry.
Perfect. Sounds very interesting. I'm curious to learn more about the sort of innovations that you're dealing with right now and if there's enough innovation in the field. But to start, would you give me a shocking fact about water that you feel like everybody that's listening today needs to know?
Yeah,
Shivam,
no,
are you
absolutely.
good?
I think, I mean, there's plenty of different facts out there in the industry. Everyone has heard of, oh, how much water is required for denim, how much water is required for a cotton t-shirt. But maybe I would more so with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation when they did the report in 2017 that the industry uses around 93 billion cubic meters of water, which is sufficient enough for 5 million people. Even though that fact as a whole seems like a very astonishing fact and very shocking to the industry, I want to take it even further. So we have an organization called Good on You, which does ratings for different brands in terms of how sustainable they are, what practices do they have, anywhere from greenhouse gas emissions to water use, living wages, worker safety, and animal welfare. So they do this rating. The most astonishing fact that I have seen regarding water is that out of the 84% of the large brands that they have looked through, none of them actually have a water goal or a water reduction goal or a water conservation goal. So it's not so much that the industry uses a lot, but there is no focus on trying to reduce it in the future as well as of now. Everyone has a lot of goals, but around water, almost 90% of the brands have no direction as of now, which is a bit more concerning to me. And that is what needs to change a bit more early on before we actually look at how big the industry is.
Yeah, very much, especially since everybody is talking about a lot about the sustainable development goals, and goal number 6 being water and sanitation obviously is a major one that's being discussed globally a lot. And it's, yeah, shocking to hear you're the second guest on our podcast who's telling us that not enough progress has been made in terms of reaching that goal, and that's obviously very concerning, especially with regard to climate change and the need for clean water resources, especially in the countries that get hotter and hotter. Obviously, that's
Yeah,
very, very disturbing, very,
yeah,
scary actually. So, can
yeah.
you do you have an idea or an answer to the question why we talk a lot about carbon dioxide? And everybody relates the fashion industry to the carbon dioxide footprint, but we're not talking about water as much. Even the water today is harming lives, especially in the global south where the production hubs are located. So why is that not the major concern for the brands?
No, absolutely. And I think this is one of the most interesting questions that I've ever come across in the industry as well. That everywhere it's okay, CO2, CO2, CO2. And I mean, there is a definite reasoning behind it. It's easier to quantify carbon emissions. Irrespective of where it is being emitted in the globe, it remains the same and it affects the entire globe altogether.
Yeah.
But water is much more of a localized issue. And the water challenges are a bit more different and uh, it's segregated as well. So it's water consumption, it's water pollution, it's water scarcity. There's a variety of factors that you can operate on in terms of how do you think about water as a whole from the industry's perspective. In certain countries, there's abundance of water. So if you're looking at water scarcity as an index, it doesn't come out as high because you have a lot of water and you use a lot of water. But in water scarce countries in the global south, as you mentioned, if you look at water scarcity, then we're like, okay, the metric is quite high, and then we need to do something about it. So because it's not a uniform standardization across the globe to of how we report and collect data regarding water, it's difficult for the industry to set goals as well and move towards target on reduction. So that is a big challenge that we're facing is we need to make it much more clearer to communicate what we're trying to fix and how we collect data and what's our eventual goal that we need to solve for.
Yeah, definitely. So Shivam, you grew up in India and you've chosen to work on water and textiles and dyes, which obviously India is very famous for dyeing and cotton growing, cotton cultivation. Can you explain how you chose water and if that maybe correlates with the experiences that you've made as a child in India in terms of maybe water scarcity? Did you face any of those issues that we've just discussed yourself?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, coming from India, as you mentioned, we're a diverse country with a lot of natural resources. Of course, it still sounds like we have an abundance of resources. And I come originally from the northern part of the country, close to the Himalayas, wherein the river Ganges originates from. So it's one of the biggest freshwater reserves that we have within the country, coming directly from the glacier up north. And it's one of the most cleanest sources of water. But surprisingly, we cannot drink from it directly, whereas opposed to maybe in other countries here in Europe, in my time in Sweden when I was studying there. If you go further up north, you can directly drink from river streams coming far up north from the glaciers. So there's a significant difference in what we do with the water that we have available and how do we treat those natural resources. In India, that has become an increasing challenge because we have polluted our rivers and lakes way too much, and it has become excruciatingly difficult to drink from them or use them directly for other purposes. So we need to have extensive wastewater treatment and other aspects that needs to be developed to make that water even drinkable. And about 30% of our country in India doesn't have access to clean drinking water, which is which is the most astonishing fact that I've ever heard. Being drinking water is a human right, and of course,
Exactly.
the world is struggling on a lot of different challenges, but not having access to clean drinking water is something that, yeah, goes beyond me. And I wish we had a good solution for it. And I believe we do have. There's a lot of reasons on why we haven't been able to get there. Personally, for me, I mean, uh, I have been maybe privileged enough to have access to drinking water most of my life. Has been evidently cleaner. So that has not been a struggle that I have seen directly, but I'm closely connected to this because when I was growing up, I was always around nature in the northern part of the country. But then when I grew up, I went to Mumbai where I did my bachelor's. So when I was studying about textiles and creating dyes and pigments, we used to create these novel dyes. We used to do the dyeing, and then all the remaining dye bath or the wastewater that we have, we would just throw it in the sink, which was very concerning to me because I was like, we are the most premier institute in the country, and as an educational institute wherein our goal is not to make profits,
Yeah.
we throw away the wastewater, but we have an expectation from the industry who's trying to make a profit, who has incredibly low margins, for them to treat water and somehow recycle it. That's the hypocrisy was not sitting right with me. I'm like, how can we as academia ask the industry to improve when we don't do basic stuff? So I started looking into solutions that I'm like, okay, maybe let me see if I can work on certain solutions and come up with it through academia internally, talk to my university, and we made significant progress within the institute to recycle water as much as possible within the
Fantastic.
institute itself. But of course, the solutions are limited to us, where we have very small volumes within the university, so it's fairly easy to do, and we have the best technologies available at hand. But then I was like, maybe if I can study a bit more about how we can come up with these solutions. When I looked to academia, it was a bit more difficult within my institute because our focus were more creating and making it better for the textile industry to do dyeing and finishing and other chemistries. Our focus
Yeah.
was not so much directly wastewater treatment, but I mean, it works hand in hand by creating better chemistry. You can reduce the load on wastewater treatment. So I started looking at maybe can I look for experience from other industries? So I started working for an agrochemical company to see maybe if they have certain things that they have figured out. But I mean, not to my surprise, it was the same similar story for them as well. they were also facing significant challenges, and their chemistry was maybe far more toxic because most of the agrochemicals with pesticides, insecticides are far more dangerous than dyes. So, of course, they had very high standards for wastewater treatment, but they still didn't have a perfect solution for doing wastewater treatment completely. So then I thought maybe, okay, maybe I go to the more heavier industries wherein the regulations are incredibly high. So I went to work for a mining company and then further to a petroleum company as well, wherein I saw, okay, this has been in the industry for decades, even centuries now. We've been using minerals and fossil fuels to create everything. So the regulations are there, the infrastructure is there, and still there were significant amount of challenges. It is, I mean, it's obviously got to do with because I was working in the global south in India, and then I visited other industries in neighboring countries. So it's not just a challenge because they haven't developed enough infrastructure or they don't have enough technologies. It's a myriad of problems that come together with lack of investments, lack of regulations, which is causing them problems to have or reach that stage where we have access or we can clean the water that we use in the industry. So those are some of the challenges that I've seen firsthand, and that is how I started to work much more in the water space. And then I went on to do my masters to understand maybe if I can learn better technologies, learn from the European infrastructure, which is doing maybe much more better on this environmental parameters. And that's how I end up doing my masters in water engineering. And now I'm trying to create solutions which I can maybe take back home to my country and help them
Perfect.
make life better.
Yeah, sounds like the perfect frame, basically, or the circle that you went in order to get where you are right now. Super
Yeah, no,
interesting. Could you, Shiva, maybe just for our audience, very briefly explain like a typical supply chain, but like a very brief one, and where exactly water damage is being made most significantly? You talked about agriculture and dyeing. Are there any other parts in the supply chain that are very water intense or polluting a lot?
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, as we've already covered, agriculture will always
Mhm.
by far remain one of the biggest chunk when it comes to natural fibers. Obviously, for synthetic, it's
Mhm.
a whole different case because there is no agriculture. But as a majority of the fashion space, maybe on the overall textile industry, we still have synthetics, which are heavier.
Mhm.
But maybe in the fashion space or the clothing apparel space, cellulosics still make a significant chunk or just natural fibers. So agriculture will always remain, but
Mhm.
more initiatives are coming in, and it's we know what the challenges are. It's we use a lot of insecticides, pesticides, and other things, and growing crops is water intensive as a general. But those problems can be dealt with. But
Mhm.
we're having challenges because it's a moving target. With
Mhm.
climate change, these challenges are becoming much more of a trouble in certain areas, but certain other areas in the world are becoming much better for growth of certain crops. So we
Mhm.
need to have maybe a collaborative approach from the entire globe to come together to find a better solution. But when it comes to the rest of the steps, where because agricultural is not just textiles, agriculture is for the entire
Any,
world for food crops and other things. So
yeah.
that will have to be a collective solution. But as we
Mhm.
come move towards the textile industry, so when we have the crops that are grown, we have a variety of steps. We do mechanical processing. So let's say we take cotton, then we have to gin it, we have to turn it into we have fiber, we turn it into yarns, then we turn it into fabric. So we knit and weave it. So all of these steps are not very water intensive. They
Mhm.
require some water here and there for cleaning. But as
Mhm.
and when we have to clean the material and then put color on it and then remove certain excess color of it and then apply different chemistries, that's wherein we spend most of the water. And
Mhm.
usually we've seen that, oh, dyeing is a challenge. I do agree, dyeing requires significant amount of water, but it is not by far the most amount of water that is needed, which is, I think, something that the industry believes that, okay, dyeing will require water. As a
Mhm.
process, I think it's a lack of finding a good way to communicate. Dyeing is, let's say, if explained as a process, it's when you take a bath and you dip your garment or a fabric inside it with some water
Mhm.
and the dye together. That's dyeing as a whole. But we have to look
Yeah.
at the entire value chain and supply chain as a process. First, you need to clean the fabric. Then you need to
Mhm.
wet it. So you maybe have a wash, a hot water wash, and then you need to do it maybe twice to clean it enough.
Mhm.
And then you have to clean the vessel that was it was in, and then you actually dye it. Once it's been dyed,
Mhm.
you have to wash it again with a hot water wash
Mhm.
and a cold water wash to remove the excess dye which has not been fixed on the material. So it's not
Mhm.
dyeing as a step itself, but the
Mhm.
things that are before and after that are
Yeah.
somehow paired on to dyeing as a word. And then we say, oh, dyeing requires too much water. So, and people are like, oh, we need to find solutions for dyeing. I agree, we do need them, but we need solutions for almost everything before and after it as well. It needs to
Yeah.
be a collective solution of how we pre-treat the fabrics, how we dye them, how we wash them. Specifically, washing cycles are maybe we have 7 to 8 washing cycles.
Wow.
So dyeing requires water one time. Washing requires the same amount of water, roughly 7 more times. So it's all accumulated to dyeing.
Yeah.
But that is how wherein we need to fix on those challenges, wherein we need to come up with better technologies, more innovative ways. We have printing, which is trying to remove water altogether, which is a phenomenal thing that I'm quite passionate about. We
Yeah.
have some technical challenges on why we haven't been able to replace dyeing as of now, and maybe I can cover that later if it comes to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's mostly within the wet processing stage, and then once this is done, we also have to think about. We believe that the garment requires most water when we are making it. So let's say a cotton t-shirt or a cotton fabric, when we're dyeing and finishing all of these steps, we require 80, 100 liters, 200 liters. But we got to think about the use phase. The use phase of the garment is wherein most of the water goes. Not everyone has the best possible washing machine from
Yeah.
Samsung or from LG or one of the big companies with the most efficient water. So a lot of the Asian countries are still hand washing a lot of things, wherein we don't have a lot of recycling systems, we don't have efficient. So that is one place where we use a lot of water. So we need
Yeah.
to work towards maybe developing materials or using materials in the design phase and the product development phase, which do not require as much intensive washing in the later stage. Or even if they do require intensive washing, if they are easier to clean. So water is segregated into a lot of places. Agricultural still be the top. Maybe use phase would come in second for me, and then the
Yeah.
actual process of making textiles will still come in third.
Yeah, interesting. I've never seen it from that perspective, actually, the different steps from the dyeing process. So very interesting to learn more about that. And you've also mentioned polyester. There's lots of information and data available about how much water consumption we can save or not save by choosing different sorts of materials. And as we all know, cotton is supposed to be a very thirsty crop, but that's only a very, very small part of the whole narrative, as cotton obviously comes from very different regions. If it's rain fed, if it's artificially fed or irrigated, it differs very much. But how is it in terms of polyester? Is it really water saving? So is it in terms of water the better choice, or is it not the better choice than cotton, for example?
Yeah, no, I think this is a question I'm the most keen to share a bit more about. I think the industry is a bit, for lack of a better word, I would say misinformed in terms of what the impact of water looks like for polyester
Yes.
and then maybe for cotton. So cotton is seen as the more of the enemy of the industry when it comes to water. Water thirsty crop, as you mentioned, requires. We've seen these statistics. Oh, it requires 20,000 liters to make this one product, and sure, that is maybe sometimes the case for horribly produced cotton, wherein the conditions are
Exactly.
absolutely abysmal, and then it's in a certain country where we are facing a lot of difficulties with actual rainfall. But it's more of a, as I discussed in the first question where we were discussing how water is calculated. Is it what kind of water? Is it water use or water pollution and other aspects? So it's divided basically into three categories. We have green water, then we have blue water, and then we have gray water. So green water is basically rainwater that it's coming on. Blue is the one we take from rivers and lakes, from surface water bodies, and then gray water is the polluted water or the discharged water that's coming out. In cotton, we use a lot of insecticides and pesticides, so gray water still is a big challenge.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of things that we're trying to reduce this impact. So with maybe I think a lot of initiatives with organic farming and other regenerative practices, where we're trying to reduce this consumption, so our gray water is not that much. And the whole conversation was meant with irrigation and then rain. In a lot of countries, we have a very good rainfall, which was, I mean, it was with how the nature is with the water cycle, rain was gonna fall, and more crops actually lead to more rainfall because we need more plants and
Yeah.
trees around to make that happen. So people believe that okay, if those crops were never done, that would be much better, and it's not so straightforward. Let's say you say, oh, cotton is a water hungry crop. Let's say a farmer, we reduce our cotton consumption in the world. So the cotton farmer might have to shut down his cotton business, then he'll move to a different crop. It's not necessarily true that the farmer moves on to a crop which is less thirsty. What if they start growing rice or something else, which is far more? So it's not a straight displacement that we reduce cotton in the industry and our water problems get solved. Not necessarily. We just offset it or pass it along to a different industry. So that
Yeah.
is one case. And when coming back to the whole polyester and how we attach it to. So polyester in the production phase, almost no water. I think the values go below 100 liters to make 1 kg, and as opposed to maybe cotton, where we're talking in the thousands, it seems like a bad choice. But when we do the impact of how we calculate water consumption for polyester, we only look at blue and gray, or no, we actually look at green and blue water only. So
Yeah.
as no rain is involved in polyester
Mhm.
consumption, that is almost not there. In blue water, we have whatever we use in the processing. But gray
Yeah.
water is not so much considered within the polyester impact story
Mhm.
because, sure, making polyester, as you did not put in enough water, you don't have as much water coming in. But
Yeah.
it's not the complete picture. How do you get to
Mhm.
polyester? You have to take out fossil fuels, which are massively done through the process of fracking, which uses thousands of liters of water, which has to be associated back to the product that you make later on.
True.
So polyester gets the privilege of not having being associated with gray water from the fossil fuel extraction. And that is where we're missing the link.
Mhm.
And even beyond, when we look at polyester as a material, even from a carbon perspective or a water perspective, most of the impact studies have been done primarily in the US, wherein the extraction
Mhm.
of oil and other resources are very well regulated. We have a lot of
Yeah.
environmental principles guiding it. We need to do it better practices. But most of the polyester is not produced in the US.
Yeah.
It's produced in China, where they are not necessarily buying, they don't produce oil as much. So they buy it from neighboring countries, which is sometimes questionable sources for petroleum that is coming in. And maybe those countries are not super keen on working or helping the environment. So their oil extraction policies could be, or practices could be far worse. And maybe
Yeah.
the impact of water and the overall biodiversity of polyester against cotton could be a bit skewed. And based on the information that I have seen so far, I think either would be very close or it might be worse at times. So
Yeah.
as we do with cotton, where it's grown plays a significant role. We got to do the same thing with polyester as well, and we got to account for the whole value chain of polyester, not just the
Yeah.
actual processing of it.
Yeah, thank you for making that clear because that's a discussion we have a lot also in our work, that lots of people consider polyester to be the water friendly choice, but then obviously everything that you've just mentioned usually is something that's not at the top of the heads of the people when talking about polyester and comparing it to cotton,
Absolutely.
unfortunately. So Shivam, we've talked about the different materials, but how about the wet processing? So you've mentioned that the dyeing process in itself is not like the most water intense process, but everything that comes around it, and you work in innovation. What's the solution that you see out there right now, which you think could be the most impactful if it's being supported and grown and implemented more in the textile industries? Is there anything that you see that could really solve this issue right now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it will be a two-pronged solution. So we can't necessarily always reduce the water use within the industry. We have certain solutions wherein we're coming up with waterless dyeing and other maybe printing as a overall solution, because printing is done with pigments and pigments are not water soluble. So you need other binders which are far less quantity, and you don't have to rely on water as a medium to do the printing. But the maybe the gaps with printing is we don't get the same hand feel as a dyed material, so it's not so fun to wear, and maybe it can't directly replace. But we're coming
Yeah.
up with phenomenal chemistry solutions wherein we're coming moving towards maybe for lack of a better word, it's softer pigments or something with a better hand feel, wherein we
Yeah.
if we can create this chemistry and those barriers can be pushed far, we can have printing replacing dyeing altogether. And we're hoping for a digital printing has scaled up significantly. We've moved up. uh, Maybe 20 years back, we were not even thinking of this. We had certain screen printing, rotary printing, and other ones, but now digital printing is getting much more advanced. Of
Yeah.
course, the production rates are slower as opposed to dyeing. It's incredibly slow and it's a technical process, but we're getting there. Maybe in the next 2 decades, there could be a possibility that we might just have moved to printing altogether,
Yeah.
or use of pigments, or we
Interesting.
have pigment dyeing as well. So I think chemistry, considering being a chemist, I am always fascinated with new chemistry based solutions. The other one is it's more so from the effluent treatment section. Because we have a lot of water, does not necessarily mean that we all of it is wasted. We have phenomenal solutions for effluent treatment wherein we can recycle the water quite a bit. So the goal is to make the water clean enough that it can be easily treated and put back into the system, so that we don't have to tap into natural resources again and again. So that is a solution that we need to work on. So it will come through better use of machines, better use of chemistry, better use of materials, which can be dyed and processed without use of toxic chemicals.
Yeah.
So it is all of it coming together. We need better materials which can be processed better through these new innovative machineries or techniques, and
Yeah.
safer chemistry, which can easily be taken out of water or else is used up completely. So why do we have to treat water so much? Because dyeing, let's say you have an exhaustion rate. So exhaustion is how much color goes from the bath to the fabric. We only
Yeah.
have 60 to 70%. So 30% of the color still remains in the water. That's why we have colored water. But we're working on solutions wherein we can increase this. So we can increase the dye uptake to 95, even close to 99, wherein the water that is remained after the dyeing can be clean. So you have transparent water, which is no coloring matter. So it has few other things with salt and other dissolved solids, which we're also trying to reduce. But this is something that we're moving towards, and I think better chemistry is the key to unlocking all the challenges that we have around water in the dyeing or the overall textile space.
Yeah, really interesting. And we hear a lot that ETPs are in place of most of the factories because governments have created laws. I know it from Bangladesh. There is a law that makes sure that all the factories, factories, have ETPs in place. However, we know from our local NGO partners that most of them are not being used, so they're not being turned on. Can you explain why they're not being used if they're already in place? So it seems like it could be easy to just switch them on and to have a positive impact on the water resources and water stewardship of the factory, but they're not being used. What's the issue behind that?
I mean, there's a variety of issues in terms of this. First, I mean, sure, we have government policies that you need to do something with it. It's difficult to monitor though. Sometimes certain countries don't have the necessary resources to make sure they do regular audits and other things. So
Exactly.
uh, companies find a way to maybe, okay, it is a law, but we're not going to be enforced on it. So maybe we have a way wherein we can just showcase that we have a plan and meet the minimum requirements and not actually do it.
Yeah.
The other one is there's also a big gap between the global north and the south. Uh, in the current economic climate, wherein the money is a bit tight for almost everyone, and suppliers run on incredibly low margins. Running effluent treatment plants is by far one of the most costliest thing that a factory can do, which almost has no returns from the perspective that water as a commodity is extremely cheap. If you were being able to recycle it to replace something that was extremely valuable, it is valuable as a resource to us, but in a monetary aspect, it holds incredibly low value, which I think either the industry or the world needs to come together to define water as an incredibly high value resource and maybe put a monetary value to it, wherein running these effluent treatment plants can become much more of a benefit than a loss. That is what is missing, maybe, and I think that
Yeah.
needs to be done. The other
And
aspect is,
why is it so costly? Just to ask, why is it so costly to run the ETP, to turn it
yeah,
on?
so it is extremely costly in terms of, first of all, as with the capex requirements. So these treatment plants are massive and have maybe 10 steps depending on how clean you want the water. So depending, if you were just taking river water and you have to clean it to make drinking water for the people to consume, and it's relatively cleaner input, it's fairly easy to treat it as well. You need maybe a couple of steps, maybe 3 steps, and it's easy. Textile industry's effluent is massively problematic in the sense that it has a lot of organic matter and it has a lot of other contaminants which are difficult to remove. And one of the biggest challenges is the aspect of salt. So we use a lot of salt in the dyeing process. Salt is a soluble substance in water, so anything that is already solubilized in water is difficult to remove because it doesn't come through physical methods or even biological treatment. So we go through multiple steps. We have primary treatment steps where we have physical separations, and then we move to secondary where we have biological treatments. So you have to create these massive tanks which have to be run. So first of all, you need a large facility. Then you need operational people who can run these factories. Then you need additional auxiliaries and chemistry which you need to put in the treat wastewater. So that brings an additional cost. Then you need to have exceptional amount of electricity to run these systems. We have pumping systems. Let's say 10,000 liters of water, pumping is easy. 2 million liters of water, pumping is very difficult, extremely cost intensive. Let's say if you have to heat the water, it's heating 5 liters of water on in your kettle, very easy. Heating a million liters of water, extremely difficult. Then you move towards even advanced systems because now ETPs You can't just do two steps. It's not clean enough that you can release into the environment because the environmental regulation has gotten stricter. So we need to clean it significantly. So there's two choices. Either the factory can let it go in the environment when it's decently cleaner, or it can create this zero liquid discharge system, which has become much more advanced and required in water scarce countries like India and other places, wherein with zero liquid discharge, everything that we create in the industry has to remain inside the facility. We do not discharge anything. So you have to add additional steps. So you go to membrane bioreactors, you go to a reverse osmosis plant, but that doesn't cut it completely. RO plants are phenomenal technologies. We can clean it. We can clean it so well that maybe we sometimes have to add minerals because it's not even drinkable. So you can clean it significantly. But then how do you remove these salts? So because we have so much salts coming in, basically the end step wherein we have to more or less evaporate water to have the salts come out. So it's a very energy intensive process. And it's basically boiling off the remaining water. So let's say if you have million liters of water and you can treat 95, 98% of it, even 2% of a million liters, if you have to boil off, you have to power so much energy. And most of the developing countries where this production happens, this energy source is coal. So it's not even a clean source of energy. So if you were maybe boiling it off with another method, it could be better. So we need to equate a lot of these solutions which are maybe being developed for improving water, but from a carbon perspective, because I think that we need to leverage that aspect that carbon is quantifiable. We have a cost aspect to it. So if there's a solution which can reduce my wastewater treatment effluent, so I have to treat less, and if I can amount that carbon dioxide savings from heating it up and running it through so many processes, that has a monetary value, which can then be associated back to this solution. So we can help incredible water saving solutions by pairing it up with CO2 to a certain extent till we have a situation wherein we are able to quantify water completely. So I mean, yeah, but back to the original question, that is why it's incredibly difficult to run ETPs. It is a lot of money. I think for per cubic meter, sometimes the average values are between $0.50 to roughly $2, and it can go even beyond, which is significantly expensive because the cost of water is roughly the same or even lower at times. So the value for treating water is much more expensive than having new water. So people just choose to get fresh water. So the industry is in a bit of a battle wherein it's now making monetary sense. So either the government incentive needs to come in, or the value of water needs to go up urgently.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shivam, for making that clear. I've heard a lot that I haven't heard before and learned a lot today. Unfortunately, we are almost done with our time for this episode. So I would like to ask you a final question before we sum up. Is there any fact about water and or fashion that you feel like is underrepresented in the international discourse, and something that you feel like our audience should hear and needs to know?
Okay. This is, I mean, it's an extremely difficult question to pick one that is
I know.
something that maybe the industry doesn't have. I think people, it's more so it's a information challenge. I think we as an industry have been going on for such a long time. We have made incredible strides, but sometimes we miss out on the fact that we're looking for solutions to from 1 to 100 all of a sudden. uh, we have made significant strides when we come from, let's say, dyeing was done at 1 is to 20, 1 is to 25 material liquor ratio. So for 1 kg of fabric, you need 25 liters of water. Now we're down to systems which can do for 1 kg 2 liters of water. So that's a significant change. And I think because the industry doesn't provide enough incentives to work or maybe think of water as a problem, I think the progress has been incredibly slow. This change from 1 is to 25 to 1 is to 2 has taken maybe 3 decades so far. Whereas if you look at carbon-based solutions, now we've gone so much beyond that we're trying to suck carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
Yeah, exactly.
So the push for solutions is incredible on the carbon side, and people look at it as, okay, this is something. But it's also, I would say, the bigger challenge is carbon is seen as an opportunity. If you can reduce carbon, you have a better image, you have a better portfolio, you can look better, and you can have a growing market. And it's also, if you invest now, you can have a lot of savings later on. Water somehow is not being seen as that, because I am a brand, I am a US brand, or I'm a European brand, but my supply chain is in the south, in the global south, wherein, okay, if they have water challenges, they have water challenges. It's not directly affecting my business, which is a big gap. And I think the legislation that maybe Europe and US are developing is very noble, and I think extremely valuable that this is being done. But those legislation need to be developed hand in hand with the global south. You need
Yeah,
to
I
understand the
agree.
challenges. At times, I've met with people who work in production and other things, have never visited a production factory. And I'm like,
Mhm.
you're making policies and you're making rules, or you're giving them work to do, which you have no understanding how difficult it is at times.
Yeah.
And then these suppliers are just running around trying to fix almost everything all at once. You have a big carbon target, you have to reduce water because voluntarily, because your country is running out of it. So maybe it's not a target being given officially, but it's a target that the suppliers have to meet. Otherwise, they go out of business.
Yeah.
And because they already have to meet this target, we might as well make it into a legislation, or it be
Yeah.
coming directly from the brands and the global north connecting with the global south to provide
Mhm.
all the incentives and the resources. And as I mentioned before, saving water has saving carbon as well. And
Yeah.
once we have made that link, I think every stakeholder in the industry from the global north will want to jump on it, because we just
Mhm.
haven't equated it well. Once we have done it, and maybe
Mhm.
hopefully through this podcast, if people can hear and we can understand that water, saving water or reusing it or recycling it, has an incredibly high carbon dioxide impact. You can reduce your footprint significantly just by doing how you manage water and giving
Yeah.
it a monetary value. I think the industry will move towards maybe this much more.
Perfect. Thank you, Shivam. That was a perfect last word. And I will make it my mission to also support that cause in terms of our work at Drip by Drip and make that more known to the companies and try to link carbon dioxide and water a bit better. Thank you so much for enlightening us today. I've learned so much new facts about water pollution and water scarcity and all matters water in fashion production, and I think our audience too. So thanks so much for joining us, Shivam, and I hope to see and talk to you very soon again.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Amara. I mean, it's a delightful opportunity. I mean, yeah, I really enjoy talking about this issue, and then most of the thoughts that I come up with, or maybe different solutions, come through discussion. And I think this is a key vital thing that the industry needs to work on, is discussing
Definitely.
openly of what our challenges are and what we need to work towards, instead of blindly chasing solutions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.